Hi guys, and welcome back to the Ghost Party. Koshmo's Ghost Party, that is fourth encounter, fourth episode, fourth day, and yes, I hope you enjoyed the first three sessions of the party, and today we will be joining author Vikram E. Diwan, novelist Vikram E. Diwan, and novelist Tim Paxton from USA. And Vikram sir is from India. And they have been traveling a lot and writing about different regions of beliefs of different regions and the haunted places. So today, in the last two sessions, we knew about the good spirit and the evil spirit. We knew that nothing can enter our body. It's probably they are just giving us signals, or we trying to connect with our higher self. In the next first session, we knew about movies, horror movies, how they are between the two cultures in the foreign land as well as in India. Yesterday, we knew little difference about writing books in the horror genre. And today, apart from that, we will be knowing about the haunted places, its beliefs, how it is replicated in the writing, and everything. So yes, I hope to have your comments and questions as in when I discuss with the two authors about the horror genre. So yeah, quickly I'll invite them and then tell you a little bit about themselves. Okay. Them. So to tell you about Tim Paxton, he has been writing. Hi Tim, how are
Hey, hey,
I
how are
am
you?
fine, fine. I'm fine. How are
Hi
you?
Kosha, hi Tim,
Hi,
Hi,
how are you?
hi.
very good.
Welcome to the party. And yeah, okay. So I was just telling my viewers a little bit about you both authors. So Tim has been writing sci-fi and horror since 1978. It's a long, long years that you are writing. And under his Kronos production banner and published numerous fanzines, including Monsters, and he writes for magazines. He has authored and published over 50 books and magazines on the wide range of subject, and he's penning his first book currently of short horror fiction, which will be based on his travels in India and throughout the subcontinent, as well as two books on Indian cinema. And he lives in USA. He is from USA. He lives in a house which is a haunted kind of, I won't say haunted place, but it's 150-year-old house, full of weird stuff, including him. So that's where he lives, right?
Hi, how are you?
Okay.
Um, Glad to be here. This is pretty exciting. I've watched all your other previous discussions, and they were very entertaining and also very informative. And of course, it's
Thank you.
good to see Vikram again.
Yeah, hi Tim,
Uh,
lovely to see you.
yeah, it's been a while. Last time we met was in New Delhi.
Yes,
We sat down, had really good discussions over coffee. It was very informative.
I
So after
remember.
everything settles, you plan India again.
Uh, I had planned on returning to India last year, but of course, COVID was a problem. I am hoping to return next year or the year after that, depending on visas and
The
how that
situation.
works out.
Yeah. Okay. And Vikram sir, novelist Vikram
Hmm.
E. Diwan, he has been on my show earlier also, and he has written his novels Warlock and the First Vampire, and the book which includes three plays, which was his recent recently published book. And his book, he's a bilingual author, so his book has been translated into Hindi, and probably the Hindi books are doing much more better than the English versions. But he is the one to write about the she vampire. Who was the first she vampire? As we discussed in the previous episodes, that the difference between the vampires, demons, angels, spirits, everything goes. So yeah, mandatory question to ease up the things is, how did you start to write in this genre, and why? And a little bit about your work. Any one of you can go first.
Vikram, go first, please.
Tim should go first.
Oh, age. Okay. I have been. I grew up in a family that we always had lots of books in the house, and my mother was into horror fiction, which was very unusual for a woman growing up in the 1930s and 40s. My first exposure to weird tales or horror fiction was when I was sick one day in bed, and my mother gave me a book by the American authors Ray Bradbury and H.P. Lovecraft to read. These are some of her favorite books she read growing up, and she handed them to me. My family also liked movies, so I watched a lot of horror movies growing up in the 60s and 70s. In the USA, we had many horror movie shows on the weekends, and I would sit in front of the TV for hours and watch all of those. And eventually I started to write about horror movies and write short fiction, starting when I was 16 years old, back in the 60s and then 70s. And then eventually I started writing more professionally. And since 2013, I have been, I joined my banner, Kronos Productions, joined with another banner called Wildside. And we put out books and magazines now. The majority of it has to do with weird cinema or horror cinema.
So it was like since childhood you live in the horror environment in terms of literature.
It was everywhere in my house, so growing up.
Yes, correct. So okay, we'll come up to what you say was very interesting, that you grew up watching horror movie as well as reading horror books. So you started writing very early. So we'll come up with that topic, the difference between the horror then and now. But first, let Vikram sir say how did he end up writing in this genre?
So if I go back and try to remember things, so even since the day when I was a child, so when I was growing up, I was interested in unusual things. It was not horror as much, but unusual things, for example, Bermuda Triangle and all that stuff. So I used to, take out cuttings from the newspaper and used to read about them and, think about them. That is how my interest in this. About me, I consider I read American authors, I read British authors, I also read Indian authors. So somewhere, that fusion has come in my understanding and also in my writing. So if I briefly tell you, my short stories were published in Canada. They were not horror. That was way back, I think 8 or 9 years back. And my first full-length novel, which was Warlock, that was of the horror genre. Even in that book, there is a fusion of the Western culture and Indian Tantra culture, because deep down, I believe the belief in ghost or occult or unusual things is same in India, in Asia, and it is same in Europe and America. So perhaps they call them demons, we call them Danav. So that is the difference. Otherwise, the belief is, worldwide. You go to any culture, you go to any religion, the belief is there. And because I have been, ever since a child, I was reading, even Sherlock Holmes author Conan Doyle and Hindi novelist. So that fusion has reflected in my writing. That is how I started out, and then two novels of Warlock series came out, and the first Vampire also came out. So I would not restrict myself into horror genre as such. I would rather, say I'm more interested in unusual things. They may be horror, they may be paranormal, not horror as such. But whatever is
Okay.
unusual, that is
Yeah,
interesting for me.
which cannot be described, which is like, which can be
Hmm.
described as not normal or something weird.
Right, right.
Right. So you have also been exposed to this horror genre reading since long,
Hmm.
since childhood. So
Hmm.
the my
Hmm.
first topic for discussion would be that what is the difference between the horror then and now? Like since child, you have been watching the movies, you have been reading books
Hmm.
since long of different authors from various countries. So, what is the difference in the movies? Basically, the horror genre then and now.
Tim wants to go first.
Okay. In the U.S., there's always been horror stories written since the 1800s. So, and up to now, I think the biggest difference between weird tales or horror stories then and through from like 1880s up into the 1970s or so, 60s or 70s, is that they were never as graphic as they are now. And now there's tons of horror books that deal with very graphic things, but also they're including a lot of universal horror stuff from all different cultures, and they're very knowledgeable writers now that actually bring research and information into their stories rather than just having just basically pulp tales that are just written very quickly for a sale. But some of those are actually really good. Some of the pulp tales are good, but I think the big difference in horror tales over the years is that there are also a lot more authors that are being recognized as good authors, because horror was for the longest time seen as or even the paranormal books were seen as basically throwaway, until you had authors like Peter Bentley or Stephen King and some big sellers that actually really sold a lot of books. I think that's the big difference now, is that horror really sells now.
So you want to like to add something? Yeah, I agree to
Yeah.
the point that
Hmm.
graphics are more these days in the horror writing or the movie, which was not earlier.
Hmm. So if I talk about India, so we had Ramsay brothers and they were making horror movies. So it was a typical style of making movies. For example, you have, a Haveli or a big house mansion and, something is happening there. So that kind of horror was there. Now I believe not just in India, but worldwide, the trend is starting towards psychological horror. Now we are going deep into the character, and as Tim very rightfully said, that more and more authors are coming in. I would not say that the authors of yesteryears were not talented, but they had their own thinking, their own style of expressing, and today it is more like psychological horror, which appeals to readers, because you go deep down in the psyche of a character and how he or she is behaving. And it is not just restricted to books as such. Even in movies you see that depth. If you take a science fiction movie like Alien, so it is not your typical run of the mill story, but still there is element of horror in that, but it is a subtle horror and kind of horror which appeals to people. So as an author or a filmmaker, you have to be much more intelligent, because if you have readers, if you have people watching your movie, they are could be from Asia, from Korea, or from America, US. You have to play with intelligent horror, and that I think is a good trend.
Correct. So you say that horror now is much more intelligent and in much
Hmm.
more depth than it was earlier. Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, you both have traveled a lot in terms of research for your writing, or as well. Tim sir has also traveled to India as well. So, like different regions have different beliefs. Which ones you have come across in any part of your travel or research, which are amusing ones or the unusual ones?
Um, of course, being an outsider or a Westerner, when you travel to a different country, almost everything is seen as new and unusual. Uh, Again, I grew up with a lot of books on the subject of
Mm.
things like this, so kind of prepared myself. But again, there's a lot of things that I find fascinating in my travels throughout India, and a lot of them have to do with various talismans and things that you put on your house to protect yourself from demons and ghosts.
Any
Different
such
regions.
place? Yeah, you've traveled across the globe. So any such place also you can talk about, which is kind of haunted or something like that.
Um, I mean, like I said, I've been as far up as Rajasthan, and then all the way down to the tip of Kerala. I mean, it's to me, it's I found that a lot of the southern states have more of the sort of magic and beliefs that I find much more interesting. Except for in Rajasthan, I went to a couple places where they drew me I got art from them. Uh, it's and to listen to people tell ghost stories or folk
Mhm.
tales. The There are a lot of places like in West Bengal that have a ton of sort of goblins as well as ghosts and things like that.
Yeah, Bengal has more.
Oh yeah, I mean, and like Vikram was saying, I mean, a lot of the first vampires possibly came out of Bengal. I mean it's that area of India had it.
See, you told very rightly. In Rajasthan, there are a lot of places which are termed as the haunted places, and people are not allowed to visit after 6 p.m. In a day. So, in India, there are many such places like Dumas Beach in Surat, the Andaman Nicobar jail, also like Kuldhara village, which got emptied in a day, over the night, I would say. So, yeah, Vikram sir, have you come across any such belief or place which you find very amusing, though whether haunted or not in real, that we would not know, but still.
Well, Kosha, to be very honest with you, I did not had first-hand experience, so my, thinking has been limited to whatever I have researched. And taking a slightly different note, because Tim has already covered this ground, so I don't want to repeat myself. I think both in movies and books, there are two areas which have been quite neglected. One is Africa and one is Asia. When I say Asia, I say China, Korea, and Japan. So what are the beliefs of those people in occult, and what is their belief in horror? That I think is neglected in mainstream English fiction and movies. So, something needs to be done in that, because it's personally, if I talk, I find those area interesting. And
Okay.
that's to answer your question. Yes, there are a lot of haunted places, not just in India, but in US and other places as well.
Correct.
So there is some substance to it. Some say it is just superstition. I don't believe in it. Personally speaking, I do believe that there is something happening there. But because I have not traveled it, I did not had first-hand experience, so I would rather not comment on that.
So yeah, you're very right. Other places like Japan, Korea, they all
Hmm.
have these beliefs which are been neglected in the writing as well as in the movies. Both we don't see.
Hmm.
Majority is we see is the US side, which are monsters and all those superheroes, super sci-fi horror kind of thing. And in
Hmm.
India, then the other side we see is the Indian horror beliefs, which
Right.
we see. But yes, other parts are quite neglected.
I would like to add that the U.S. interest in Japanese horror has actually been around since the 1960s. It wasn't much of it wasn't imported over here. Most of them came over with subtitles or badly dubbed. And I did watch new ghost stories from Japan when I was growing up on late night TV. I wish there was more available. I mean, I went to Japan in 2009, and I went to various temples, including a temple of a very famous Japanese ghost stories called Yotsuya. And it's the Japanese hold their interests in ghosts very similar to what I found out. What I believe is a lot of Indians hold a belief in the ghosts, and that that unlike the West, ghosts in India and in Asia and Japan are congruent with modern life, and they're just part of modern life. They're just part of your existing. They're not, even if you may not believe in ghosts, they are. You grew up with ghosts as part of growing up. In the U.S., a lot of that has been separated a lot. If that makes any sense.
Okay. All right. So yeah, this was about the travel, haunted places, and wanted to know about the haunted tourism from your end, which is very hyped these days. And as you both travel a lot, so I wanted to know about it.
Me, I guess. I went to a couple. I went to a palace in Rajasthan. I can't remember the name of it. It was out in the middle of a lake. I think it'd be great if they increase the tourism of the paranormal. They do that in the U.S. a lot. There are a lot of hotels and houses that you can stay at, like as an Airbnb, and you're almost guaranteed the possibility of a ghost, you know. And the whole thing of paranormal research has really blown up in the past 10 years. And that's also, I think, is part of the tourism. But I think it's fun. I think it'd be a fun thing.
So people have there been incidences where people have witnessed or experienced the paranormal activities there? What you are talking about?
I mean, people claim that they do. I mean, it's all paranormal and supernatural occurrences are all subjective. I mean, I could say that I put down my teacup and I swore it was full of tea, but now it isn't. I mean, there's a certain ghost in Japan that drinks your tea when you're not looking. I grew up down the street from our local cemetery, and I've not yet ever seen a ghost in my life. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I've just not seen ghosts. I would love to see a ghost. I would love to see a flying saucer.
You get it.
Thing like that, but it hasn't happened to me. But I don't poo-poo any kind of interest in the paranormal or supernatural. I just don't. I like writing about it, but I'm just don't really believe in a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. So you, Vikram sir, have you ever wanted places or such?
Yeah, so there are two parts to your question. One is regarding tourism. So I would say that it is overhyped, as you use the word hype. So it is all hype. I don't believe that you go and you will see a ghost. And the second thing where I agree with Tim, where he used a very beautiful word, which is subjective. So everything is subjective. So belief in paranormal, do you experience paranormal? Do you see something? I see something. Tim does not see something. So it is all very subjective. So I believe, based on my experience talking to people, based on my research, that we have a vibration, we have a tuning. On the basis of that, you meet a person like Tim, you instantly hit him hit with him, and you feel he's your friend. So it is a positive vibration between me and Tim, me and Kosha. Similarly, if I have a certain vibration, I would be able to connect with a spirit. But necessarily, would it be a scary ghost? Would it be a demon? Again, it is very subjective. Depends from person to person where you are in your spiritual journey. On the basis of that, you can experience certain things. If you don't see a ghost, does not mean ghost does not exist. On the other hand,
Exactly.
if someone sees, a demon's talk to me, might not be true. Maybe, the person is psychologically disturbed and, making up things in his mind. He might not be lying.
Hmm.
The experience may be real for him. He might actually be seeing and sensing a demon. It does not mean necessarily that, demon is there. If you go back in history, then, I'm sure Tim would be aware there was, belief in witchcraft, and, in medieval Europe, people thought witches, they used to go and, they
Yeah.
used to
Well,
talk to the devil. But some people have that thinking that no, they were just disturbed women and they were just fascinating and dreaming up things. Actually, the devil was not there. And just be rational about that. On the one hand, you say, uh, Satan is so powerful that, he is a rival of the God. On the other hand, you believe that, Satan would be appearing to ordinary women. So how is that possible? So again, it is very subjective. Whatever you are sensing,
yeah,
whatever you are experiencing during your spiritual journey, during your spiritual advancement, may be true for you, maybe not true for others. So
correct.
again, it is very subjective.
Yeah, it's very subjective, but I love to hear this that some people claim that in the haunted
Hmm.
places they go to adventure and they have even experience something which is supernatural. So yeah, and you said very right word, psychological things. So person who experiences this goes through a psychological trauma, as well as a normal person who is mentally ill, which we avoid to talk about, also goes through should take help of a psychiatrist. So psychology and horror are in a way connected. More is related to psychology. So what are your views on it?
Tim?
Uh, I believe that the okay to go back and talk about science and all. There are various theories on how actually the human brain thinks and how what we perceive things cognitively. Um, I mean, this whole example, we're talking to each other over electronic waves basically right now. So, and what we're seeing is I hope I see Vikram there with like a red shirt on. It looks like a dartboard or something. I can't remember behind him. And Kosha's up there and she has a candle. I'm hoping that is what I'm seeing. I may not see that. I mean, it may be totally different. I appreciate people who can see things I can't. I know someone who I love very dearly who sees things I can't. But I can't. But I don't believe that seeing things and hearing things are psychologically is a psychological impairment. Not always. Sometimes it is, but other times it's because, like Rickman was saying, the waves. Sometimes some people are very lucky to be able to ping in on that. But there are people who have been psychologically have been locked away for hearing voices and seeing things. And now science is saying, well, hold on, wait a second. They may actually do that. There is a possible scientific reason why they're hearing these things and seeing these things and perceiving these things subjectively than what the majority of other people are. And there's a lot of old English sayings that have to do with that, like being sometimes people were called crazy, they were out of their mind, which means that
Correct.
their mind left them and something had stepped in. And there's a
But
lot of magic that sort of stuff does possibly happen.
Correct. But in a way, see, when my beliefs are challenged, somebody's beliefs are challenged, what they have believed since ages, and that has been challenged, it's a psychological trauma. So, what we
Oh yeah.
say that, yeah, it's a great psychological trauma to them. So, what we say that, yeah, that person is weird is correct in a way, but for that person, that might be a normal behavior because his or her beliefs are challenged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like in a lot of South India, there's a lot of animism and Shaktiism. And there is more, say, goddess possession and
Yeah.
female ghost possession in the South than there is in the North. It does happen up in the Northeast, but there's a lot of it in the South because culturally, that is something they grew up with. And to have something move into you for a short period, like during a dance or something, then you have, it's very difficult to
So,
call someone crazy.
so just your voice is cracking.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, your voice was cracking, and can you be a little loud, please?
Okay, I'll be a little louder. Um, I believe that cultures like from the South, which deal with spiritual possession, a lot of India deals with spiritual possession. Um, when it's considered very natural or part of a culture to be, say, have the goddess move into you while you're dancing and be part of you. Um, an outsider would look at that as, and many Western outsiders look
Uh,
at.
yes, Vikram sir, we'll wait
Hmm.
for Tim to join again. We can't hear. Tim sir,
Right.
can you leave the video and join back again?
That again, and
We're
I'll
not
let you.
able to hear you. Your voice is cracking.
I think something to do with Tim's connection, and maybe, he can join again and then we would be able to hear him.
Yeah.
And in the meanwhile, just to add to what Tim was saying, so I do not believe that, a person who is seeing things, who is hearing things which others are not hearing, necessarily it is a psychological illness, right? So it may actually be, to use a wrong word, a superpower, to just to make you understand that that person has that ability because of his or his spiritual journey, because of his progress in the spiritual journey, that he or she is able to hear things which you cannot or I cannot, right?
Correct.
So that is the power of that person. To give you a simple example which happens to everyone, I'm sure it would have happened to you as well. It is called premonition. You sleep, you have a dream about something, and it might happen the next day, it might happen next month. So how is it possible? On the one hand, we say that future is not pre-decided. We do not know what will happen tomorrow, but how you are able to view something in your dream, maybe a loved one who dies after few weeks, but you have a premonition in a dream, you see actually that person, a loved one, is dead, and the
Yeah.
actual event happens after a few weeks or few months. So those kind of dreams where you see things which happen in the future, again it is a indication of it is not as simple as what science tells us. And
Correct.
as Tim
Correct.
was saying, now science is actually expanding its boundaries. So not necessarily a psychological illness. On the other hand, you have to be very careful. Some people actually have that medical condition which require
Exactly.
help.
But they are
So
not ready to accept it. Correct.
yes,
Correct. Correct.
so good to have Tim back.
Yeah, sir, you will have to continue from the start. Northeast से वापस, I mean, start from the northeast again.
Okay. I don't know where I was cut off, but
So that's why I'm
like
saying,
Vikram was saying.
yeah, northeast. You should start from northeast again. The part what you were talking about, northeast.
Oh, okay. Okay. Was I talking about southern India and
Yeah,
animism and dancing and all that? Okay. There are people who do have psychological issues, and But in some cultures, people who are possessed or see things, it is it is a natural thing. Um, but it's really hard. It's hard to tell it. Like you're saying, it's very hard to tell the difference between what can be a psychological illness and what could actually be a paranormal or supernatural
Correct.
um, occurrence.
Yeah. So you took out another topic also, that in India it is believed that goddess comes, possesses the body of his male or female and talks to us through that person. So how far do you think this is true, or is it just
Uh,
again a high myth?
I mean, any of that channeling has been going on for thousands of years. I mean, you have a lot of a lot of the channeling can be religious, or it also can be like what started in the 1800s up in the 1920s in the US, had channeling of superior beings or other beings, and you have people who channel space aliens. So again, I don't think I don't think it's I don't think maybe it's 50-50 of being either a psychosis or it could be a spiritual thing. It depends on how you look at it. Again, I've never had it happen to me. I do and love a person who does see things and tells me about them, and I wish I could see that, but she is not psychotic. I don't believe so at all.
Correct. Okay, we have people commenting over here. Thank you for joining. Hiren, we have Rajesh Rupal, we have Abhirup sir, who is saying that nice to see new faces, different faces from the different countries. Thank you, sir. It's an encouragement. Yeah, Vikram sir, you want to continue something, add something to this? Because this
Yeah.
happens
Mhm.
not goddess or anything like Christ. You see a priest saying that Christ told me this, Christ told me to convey this. So
Mm.
yeah, you want to add something?
I would say I would rather be the devil's advocate here, and you have to be rather skeptic about it. So you cannot believe, every time it happens. Some people, particularly India, is very infamous for this. We have this God man who have, direct channel with the God, and they say a lot of things, and they actually build up empires. So you cannot really believe whatever they are saying every single time. On the other hand, I believe you cannot dismiss possession out of hand, that this is not happening, this never happens, because as Tim has also very rightly said that possession has been happening since time immemorial. You go to any culture, be it the Greek culture, Roman culture, Asia, Africa, so possession has been part and parcel of our lives. uh, Higher beings, taking up, control of the body, speaking through that, it happens. So a different way of looking at it, sometimes you have mediums who have session where you can, speak to the spirit of a dead relative. So some of
Correct.
them may be imposters and some of them may be real. So it is, 50-50. You have to be a little skeptic. On the other hand, you cannot dismiss it out of hand that, this is not happening. So possession does happen, and, powers do channel their energy and, speak through a woman or man, whatever. So, but you have to, take a call on that, what is real and what is fake.
Correct. That is difficult thing to take a
Hmm.
call, real or fake.
Right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you have been talking about a lot of cultures which you have read and
Hmm.
researched on. So, is there any such place like we have haunted places in India which you have heard and which you have not visited,
Hmm.
but you have read
Hmm.
or would like to visit or something like that? If you
Hmm.
can tell us about such places.
A lot of places, not just in America, but in England also. There's a lot of, haunted places. I don't know what is it with England, because, some people speculate maybe it is the, weather of England, which is, wet and cold, that, spirits love to live there and speak to people. So a lot of haunted places have been there, and I think again I keep repeating the same thing because currently it is occupying my mind. More research needs to be done, about Africa, about Korea, about Japan, and as Tim said that a lot of Japanese movie, Korean movies are making their way to America and through America coming to India. But I believe there's a big gap in mainstream, English writing of
Mhm.
horror genre where these cultures have been neglected. For example, if you talk about vampire, the first name, probably the only name which will come to your mind is Dracula,
Dracula.
which is basically, a European creature or a European character. So my thinking when I wrote first vampire was why vampire should remain in Europe, only in America, because different cultures also have their belief in vampire. So that is how, my interest in vampirism grew, and I wrote up that story, the first vampire, which is set in British India, where we have a Indian vampire, a she vampire. So similarly, different culture needs representation in mainstream fiction, also in movies, because belief in occult or magic or paranormal is worldwide. It is not restricted. Again, I'm repeating myself, to a one particular religion or a one particular culture, one particular race. It is a worldwide belief. Maybe people use different language, different expression, different names, but the core belief is the same. And you have to stop myself because I have this awful habit. Once I get started, I just keep rolling on. So another topic which
Okay,
I
I
wanted to add was why horror appeals so much to people. But later we should take up that. Before you should ask
yes,
your
you
question or
take a
another
for
topic.
yeah, yeah. So, real and the real, be it movie script reviewing or writing a book or publishing or promoting a movie. How do you transport a reader or the audience to the place described in the scene, be it in writing or the movie? I know that in movie it's a little bit easier than in the books.
Uh, yeah, with a script and everything, it is easier because you can just instantly cut to a different scene with the camera. Uh, with a book, and writing, as Victor knows, you've got to be able to set your transition up perfectly, or the reader will become totally confused to what's happening. Unless, I mean, you can go into, say, a third person of some sort, and it can be really confusing. There's some horror novels which and horror short stories which you read and you're not quite sure who's the monster in it and who isn't for quite a while.
Right.
With cinema, it's always there's always some sort of knowing. You actually see what you're being directed to for most of the time. Not all horror films are like that, but and it's I think it's tougher to write a
Yeah, it's tougher to
horror
write
action.
than movie. Yeah, of course. Because in movie you have sound, scenes, lightings, everything.
Mhm.
Sir, your views, Vikram sir? And yeah, before
Yes,
you say something, just a moment. I would like to tell the audience that if you know about such haunted places, be it in India or outside India, kindly put down in the question session or the comment section. I would love to read it loud. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to what Tim was saying, I agree with him that it is difficult to create horror in books when you compare it to movies, because you don't have the advantage of, sound or music. You don't have camera movements, and, your reader can go away anytime. It is difficult to create that. So somewhere you have to get your reader interested and pose a question or a challenge to the reader. What is happening next? What's going to happen next? So that is important. Then you have to create the atmosphere. But deep down thing which I think many writers, sorry to say, neglect is you have to enjoy writing your story. You have to enjoy your storytelling, because if you don't enjoy your writing, you don't enjoy your storytelling, then readers today are very smart. They are going to go through maybe 5 pages, 10 pages, and then they will lose interest. The moment you actually start enjoying your writing and enjoy your storytelling, it shows in your ultimate creation, which is the book.
Definitely it was
And then
in the
the
book.
yeah, and then the reader also get interested in that.
Correct. Okay, the fiction and the horror, the relation between them, in whether it is a real experience book, whether it is real experience, real paranormal investigation series or movie, or the fiction. I want to know the relation between the fiction and the horror. How fiction is more implied in the horror movies or writing.
Tim,
Uh, can you ask the?
I always throw the ball at Tim
Yeah,
whenever I need time to think.
yeah. Same here. I'm just throw the question at me one more time.
Okay, I want to know the relation between fiction, fantasy, and horror, whether it is in movies or the books or the real paranormal investigation movie or series. That
Uh,
is,
the relationship between all three can be pretty harmonious depending on how it's approached. Uh, I think people are more into watching a horror film or going or listening to a horror play or any of that. They're much more probably into that or experiencing like going to a haunted house or something like that because it's instantaneous. Um, reading a horror book to some people find reading a chore, which I think is nonsense. But some people don't like to read; they want to experience a movie or a play or something like that. So to be able to put together something that will be universal in horror is kind of difficult if that makes any sense.
okay. Yeah.
Just to add to what Tim was saying, I think it is different, set of people. Some people enjoy watching movies, but they never read a book. On the other hand, there are people who enjoy reading books, but they are not into, movie watching as much. But again, movie or a theater have advantages in horror genre, which books unfortunately do not have, right? Because the advantage, if I can say, books have is that we are counting on the imagination of our reader, right? So if we can create that atmosphere, we can trigger the imagination of the reader, then we have almost total hold on the reader, and then you have to hook the reader into what is going to happen next. uh, Not just about horror, any kind of fiction, it is totally dependent on triggering the imagination of the reader. Once you trigger that imagination, then you have an advantage which covers the disadvantage, vis-a-vis a movie or theater. That is my thinking. Again, just to,
So,
repeat what Tim was saying, if I make any sense.
Oh yeah. I think you explained it much better than I did.
okay,
So
so what
kind of
I
you.
want to add is uh, fantasy or fiction is added to build up, trigger the emotion of the readers or the viewers in the horror genre when it comes to writing or the real experience or the real experience. So fantasy and fiction is added in both the things, real and real. Am I right?
Oh, you mean real as in real and then real as like real film, real of film.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, you there's always a little bit of fiction or fantasy in
Fantasy, yeah.
any kind of horror writing, and we're not talking about always fantasy with like elves and giants and stuff, but
Yeah,
you
no,
have
no.
you
Any
have to
kind of
add a little spark of the unknown to keep the reader involved. And same with film. I mean, there's some movies that just flat out show you everything, and it's fun, but you walk away not remembering much, in my
hmm,
opinion.
hmm.
When you add a little spark of the unknown to either your books or to film, I think you're able to take the horror that's involved and actually make it sit with the reader more or with the viewer more.
Correct. Okay, we have one comment from the viewer Nina that fort in Jaipur is definitely the haunted fort. Okay.
Oh yeah. That's right. Yeah. I went to that, and the same day I went to a Hanuman too, so I got it kind of mixed up.
Did you experience anything? You went there, so
There's not much to see during the day, and it's closed, like you said, after 6. I mean, I'm
yeah,
quite sure I
yeah.
could sneak in, but I'd rather not get arrested and get tossed into jail in Jaipur. You know.
Okay, I have been to Jaipur, the same fort, but I didn't experience anything.
No,
Similarly, I too went at the daytime.
And I've been to haunted places in the middle of the night. I mean, I've been to the cemetery down the street in the middle of the night, been to supposedly haunted areas around where I live in the middle of the night, and I never felt anything or saw anything spooky. But who knows? I may be able to one day walk up to somebody and start talking to them and then realize they're a ghost.
And have a cup of coffee in the middle of the night with him or her.
Right. And then realize they turn around and she disappears. So
yeah. Okay.
I think, Tim, it is more to do with your vibration, right? You have to have the right vibration before you start attracting ghosts.
I guess maybe I'm too much of a skeptic. I want to actually.
Yeah.
I mean, skepticism. To have a healthy skepticism is one way to appreciate the paranormal, because that way you can put blinders on and you can bypass a lot of the stuff that people set up, fake stuff that people set up.
I think people who actually write horror or make horror, they are much more skeptics than people actually believe that. For example, if you are writing horror, or if I'm writing horror, everybody believes that we are weird or we have ghosts dancing around our house, or we see ghosts all the time. Whereas you and I, we are the people who would not necessarily believe anything at first go. So we are much more skeptic, let's say, than a person like Kosha, who would readily believe everything.
But I do have protective talismans around the house.
Right.
Only just in case. I do have things like that. I mean, I grew up with that sort of things around the house, and when I painted the walls in my house when I was renovating, I did put symbols underneath on the walls and then painted over it. It's just something I grew up with and something I find interesting. And who knows, maybe if a certain paranormal entity targets my house, hey, I've got protective stuff around my house and they can't bother me. So who knows? I'm just being precautious, but a very skeptical precaution.
See, I have not done anything on my house.
I have one of those big demon faces on a pan that I bought in India on my front door. With the red face and fangs. I have that on.
Tim, why is that? You want to repulse, paranormal entities, or you want to attract and, invite them over?
Invite. Come, I want to experience.
Okay. I would like to repulse all the negative ones. I wouldn't mind having a nice ghost come in and sit down and chat with me, but I don't want one that wants to come in and shred my soul and swallow it and run away. I do believe there are good and bad entities. If there are there are good and bad ones. If you are a horrible, evil person and you were psychotic and mean and you died, I'm quite sure in the afterlife that's what you are. And I'm quite sure there's lots of very helpful and nice ghosts and goblins.
See, I was that day having a session with paranormal investigators. What they said is, these entities are very good at projecting themselves that they are good or they are our loved ones. But in actual, they are the nasty ones. So they are very good at pretending or making us believe. That's what they said. I have not yet experienced.
Well, there are. I've read about trickster spirits, just like trickster demons and trickster gods, that will lead you
Yeah,
down to a path until and then you become very comfortable with them and you drop your guard. And then that's when they decide to kidnap you. Or
correct, correct.
I mean, I love reading about occurrences and folk tales that have to do with tricksters. They go all the way back to Africa. There's a sort of a
Mm,
spider god whose name I can't
mm,
remember, who is a trickster god.
mm,
Same with Loki, of Northern European. He's a trickster god. One of his things was just totally having fun and fooling people, but in a very malicious way. So you're right. There are bad spirits that pretend to be good until the last second, then you're in trouble.
mm. Yeah, there are.
That's really
Yeah.
interesting, the topic which Kosha has brought up, trickster spirits. So, one has to be very careful what you are dealing with, right? So it is really can happen, when you start believing in things, some things you want to believe, then it is easy for, whether a human being or whether a trickster spirit to actually, make a fool out of you.
Make a fool out. Yeah, and especially when you're in your weak mental, weak emotional
Exactly.
state. Hmm. At
Hmm.
that time, it is very easy for them.
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, the main question, difference between Indian horror and the foreign horror, other horrors, be it movies or writing.
Um, I mean, a lot of the Indian authors are ones that I've read that are recent authors, but when I did a research to try to find old Indian horror stories, what I could usually find, anything prior to the 1960s, a lot of it is just basically were collections of folk tales that had ghosts in it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not well aware of, uh, like in the U.S. and Europe, and even in Japan, there are books of ghost stories that were written like close to 200 years ago. I mean, things like
Hmm.
that are. I'm not quite sure of Indian collections of horror stories until recent times.
Hmm.
So I think that's the big difference, is that
Hmm.
there's a long history in the West and in countries like Japan and China that have authors of horror stories or collection of horror stories, or people that went out and collected folk horror stories for 100, 150 years. Vikram may know more about the Indian history than I do.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not too much to add, but I think in India it has more, the focus has been on religion and spirituality and less on, ghost and
Yeah.
horror. So,
Correct.
compared to West.
Yeah.
So now the things are changing, and, we bank on that spirituality and that religion, and, belief in ghost and paranormal has been there, but I would not say, the kind of tradition which has been in Japan or in the West, that is only have been missing in India.
But I guess it seems like, from what I've read online, the Indians are
Hmm.
playing catch up really fast
Hmm.
on developing.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. This horror genre has come up with I mean, science horror, zombies, everything. So yes, they are catching up fast with the world in terms of writing.
There is a genre of filmmaking in India that I wish they could do, is a lot of the science fiction,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
even science fiction horror, which is a really great
Hmm.
combination.
Correct.
Uh, I would love to see that in India. There were
Hmm.
quite a few places I visited where I could see that sort of happening, and it's one of those subgenres of horror that I really like. You have and in film too. There's a lot of science fiction horror films that are been very popular in the West for quite a
Hmm.
while.
Hmm.
I wish Indian directors would discover,
Pick up.
and
Yeah,
not let the
because
British
India, what we have in movies or writing is the ghost, which is moving in the white clothes, open hairs, twisted feet, and who can, revolve their head
Mm.
360-degree
Yeah,
around. That is what we have seen in
like
Indian
Piranha.
writing or the movies, and which is commercial movies. I would talk about commercial horror, be it writing or movies, has made us believe in lot of myths about horror. That is what I feel from India. Sir, what do you say?
I think kosher, some people actually enjoy that. So you better not, try to negate that, lady walking in a white sari and, all the songs playing in the background. But on a
Exactly.
serious note, yeah, things are changing
I'm
for the better. I
though.
think Tim is also fan of that kind of movies. I am a fan of that kind of
Wait,
movies.
But but we have other genres, sub-genres also. So
Hmm.
Tim is right that Indian directors should take up those things, or Indian authors should take up those things. Yeah, I know there are a lot of people commercially they like those things, or typical music and everything background. So yeah,
Hmm.
but that has made us believe lot of myths about horror. That's what I feel. This
well,
commercial horror.
that happens. That happens in the U.S. as well. I mean, you're looking at all the paranormal activity movies and things like
Hmm,
that.
hmm,
Uh,
hmm,
a lot of those a lot of those are movies that keep recycling the same thing over and over and
hmm,
over
hmm.
again.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
a lot of say there's a lot of times they say based on reality or based on a true story or I don't know. I think there's a chance to approach a horror differently
Hmm.
and and it's just I think they could do that better. And in India, I think they have a problem because a lot of times you're dealing with a producer or a series of producers that don't want you to veer off from what you normally
Exactly.
Okay.
make. And the advantage of what's been happening in the pandemic is that you have a lot of Indian filmmakers that are making shorts, a lot of 15-20 minute shorts, and they don't have a producer breathing down their neck wanting them to produce something commercial. And
Yeah.
I've seen some shorts that are really good. And but I'm sad.
Hmm.
I'm sad to think that once everything gets back on a roll, where the theaters are opening up and Indian cinema industries are really starting to move movies out again, I think that the producers won't recognize some of these small filmmakers that make very interesting movies, and they want to go back to your normal stuff.
Exactly. And I think you can experiment much more with a book than you can with
Well,
mainstream movies because there's a lot of money riding on that movie, whether it is in India, whether it is in the West. So everybody wants to play safe.
mm,
Right, but even in the West, if you go for, shorter budget movies, sometimes they are called B-grade movies. I've seen really good stuff in those kind of movies where, directors and writers have been able to experiment with different things. So don't, depend on mainstream Hollywood movies or mainstream movies in India to give you that kind of stuff. You have to,
Hmm.
somewhere depend on new age, filmmakers or writers who are trying to experiment with different things.
Hmm. So in a way, you have experimented in your writing with the she vampire.
Hmm. Right, right. So I
Hmm.
don't want to talk a lot about my book. It would seem that I'm promoting my own book on your show. But
oh,
yes,
That's
I have tried to,
Republican.
experiment with that. So for example, as I said that, when you think of vampire, you only think of Dracula. So I have tried to, show a new kind of vampire, nothing
hmm.
to do with the West. On the other hand, because there are a lot of readers of English fiction in the West, and also I wanted to, move away from the, current scene or current setting. So I set the story in British India because apart from the Skinbond, I don't think a lot of people have written, books or stories about the British Raj,
There,
what was happening there. So I thought it would be really interesting to have a vampire and see how the, Britishers are going to deal with her.
um, one of the earliest uh, sort of the British Empire Indian books, short stories I read. There were some, I can't remember the title of it. It's a Richard Kipling book, short stories,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
some of those are horror stories. Some of the short ones,
Hmm.
and of course, if I
Sure.
thought more about this question, I would have grabbed my book on some of his short stories and read about them. But I like to read period books, books that don't take it because you have to create,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, and Tim, why your recent book is about Indian, mostly the stories from India and the subcontinents and the on the two Indian cinema also. So why you are attracted towards Indian horror?
Um, I've been attracted to horror movies or science fiction or horror movies of any culture. And sometimes I've gone through periods of watching a ton of I watch a ton of Japanese movies. I really like uh, the Hong Kong Chinese horror scene that happened between the 1970s up until the 1990s. There was some very good films out of that, and I was pretty much unaware of Indian film growing up. Uh, the only things I actually saw growing up or in college were films by like Ray, like Devi by Ray from like any of those 1960s uh, alternate cinema movies, and most of them were Bengali movies. I was unaware that Indians actually had a horror genre developed until the 19 someone gave me a bootleg VHS tape of Varana, and I watched this and said, "Oh, this is something new." But it was so hard to find anything. Living in Ohio, I went to one or two Indian grocery stores that rented Indian videotapes, and they kept telling me, "No, no, no, Indian movies. There are no horror movies in India. They don't make them." And I was like, "No, no, I have this movie. No, they don't make them." So basically, luckily, the internet came along, and I was able to do a lot of research
Hmm.
and found a couple companies like Induna.com. They until they I think they're almost out of business, but they did have a lot of movies, and they ended up buying uh, up to I used to have about 500 Indian horror films on DVD and VCD and watched most of them, which was a chore at times,
Yeah, of course.
but it was, and because most of them were in six different languages. None of them
Hmm.
had most of them did not have subtitles. So you
Hmm.
have to sit and watch these movies, and
Hmm.
uh, it was. I got to fall in love with Indian horror and Indian fantasy
Yeah.
movies because I like the snake goddess movies. I like goddess movies. Majority from the south. I like the southern goddess like Devi by Kodi Ramakrishna and a couple of films. I love devotional films. I think they're fun. Uh,
So
there's
Indian horror is mostly based on that only, goddess, Devi, and all such things, right, sir?
yeah. They're basically they're ghost movies. Most of them.
Hmm.
You have the rare monster movies like the Ramses produced monster movies, or you have something like Bat's Creature 3D, which was a monster movie that it didn't do well at the box office, but he tried. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
and there are other horror films out there. Um, but if you want to be different, you are swimming upstream against people who want to see the same thing over and over.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, Vikram sir, want to add something?
Yeah, so that is why, a person who is interested in, things which are horror, he has to look up to the West. So, for example, if I want to read about, different horror stories, want to watch different horror movies, I have to see American movies or, European movies or
Hmm.
pick
Hmm.
up the books by those writers because in India there is not so much, Indian horror, if I can use that word, in movies or in books as such.
Hmm.
So there I agree with Tim as such.
Okay. So yeah, what is the future of horror genre, be it writing or movies? If you can throw a little bit light on it.
You first, Vikram. I've been doing talk.
So I would not say cliche things like the future is very bright or anything. So Kosha, thing is that there is a certain set of people who are interested in reading horror, watching horror, and that
Hmm.
I think is going to stay. It will never become mainstream. You will not have, people going with their children watching a horror movie. Sorry to say, even as a horror author, that's not going to happen. So
They
horror always has a certain appeal, and if it appeals to people like you or Tim or me, then a certain section of readers and movie goers are always going to be interested in
Hmm.
watching horror as a genre. But it's never going to become mainstream as such. But we should be happy with that because every genre has its limitation. But we have our die-hard fans. When I say we, I say that horror writers or horror movie makers,
Hmm.
whosoever is working in the horror genre, there are die-hard fans. It is not normal fan as such.
Hmm.
So that way we are compensated, I believe.
I think
Correct.
horror films have always been popular in the U.S. Going all the way as far back as Dracula. The 1930s Dracula was a smash hit. And then you had Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and a whole series of horror films that were mostly huge hits. And it still happens today. You have films that people don't think will do anything, and they get released, and people flock to the theaters to see them. Again, it goes in cycles because I think people will get bored of a lot of horror films, and they'll wait for an original one or a good one comes out, and then it'll resurge again. Uh, I'm hoping that happens in India, that it becomes a major hit. But I
Hmm.
think one of the big thing that Indian cinema and Indian authors may have a problem with is that what there are 22 national languages, and so you have, unless you're writing in something that is a bridge language like English, some of your horror stories may be written in a in a national tongue like Malayalam or Tamil or something that will never be read by anybody else outside of that state. Uh, in the U.S., since we have basically English here, and there's other languages, Spanish and Chinese and stuff, but you have an advantage like that. I think in India there's a slight disadvantage because unless you're writing in English or in Hindi, which is also a bridge language, I guess,
Hmm.
all your books aren't going to get out there if you're down in Tamil Nadu or Kerala or any place else like that, and you're writing in your national language or your state language. It's not going to be. It really won't be read unless they get translated.
Correct. Right. Okay, so yeah, any other thing you would like to add up, any one of you, before we end up the session about the horror, about the movie, writing, haunted places, anything?
I would just like to wish Tim happy Independence Day.
Oh, thank you.
Ah,
It's our
independence.
independence from
Correct.
the British as well.
Yeah.
It's
I
always
think it has been quite long and interesting session, so not much to add there from my side.
and just thank you
Yeah.
for inviting me to this, and
Thank-
it's good to
mm,
talk to you again, Vikram. It's been too long,
Like,
and maybe we'll have to chat over the phone sometime.
sure, love to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. It was nice having you both and talking about the things. Guys, please, I'll be putting down their Insta ID so you can have a look at their work or DM them or chat with them. And yeah, if you still remember any haunted places you would like to know, viewers, then please put down in the comment section after you watch this video later. Thank you for joining, both of you. Thank you so much. It was an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank
Thank
you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, friends. So yeah, next week we'll be back again with some other author in the horror genre, and we'll be discussing. Till then, stay tuned. Thank you for joining. Bye bye. Good night.